So, what is Sicilian defense opening? Sicilian defense is the most popular opening in chess today ever since it overran e5 as the most popular response to avoid the king's pawn opening. During the last 20 to 30 years, Sicilian defense has been upgraded 100-fold, and the theory has advanced so much that there are numerous lines and variations of Sicilian defense nowadays. So, after e4 for white, black chooses to play c5, the Sicilian defense move. Now, what black is doing with c5 is that he's trying to sort of challenge the center indirectly. Playing e5 is of course following what white is doing symmetrically, and it is the most sensible move theoretically, because it opens up the bishop, the queen, and it does most work for the development of black pieces. The move c5 on the other hand, it doesn't do that. So what the move c5 is doing actually? Firstly, the move is only helping to develop the queen. Nothing is being done for king safety and king side development, so that means black is going to have to work on that in the next few moves. Secondly, black is challenging the center from the flank, and that means black is mostly going to have the queen side to work on, while white is going to have to work on the king side. This indirectly means that the white attack is concentrated on king side, while black attack is concentrated on the queen side. In practice, what happens after Sicilian defense in most opening game is that white d-pawn gets traded away for black c-pawn on this square. And once that happens, white has traded its central pawn with black flank pawn. So now, even though we all know that pawn only has 1 point, but we can all agree that central pawn has higher value, as we know that who has more central control, which are most often achieved by the pawns, has an advantage. So we can say in the endgame or late middle game, black is going to be better because it has more central pawns, while white only has e and c pawn. Thirdly, once black plays c5, it has to play several pawn moves in the next 10 moves in the opening to solidify his position. So black is either playing e6, d6, a6 or g6 variation combinations of this move. So the basic idea for white, as white doesn't need to do all this kind of move, all this pawn move, is that white has to get as much initiative going as much as possible up to the opening. If black plays properly and survives in the opening, gets to trade up a few pieces and gets into the endgame, black is going to be better because of his positional advantage of the central pawn majority. So basically that is the basic idea of Sicilian defense opening theory.
I am now going to explain two advantages of Sicilian defense on black. The first advantage is the vast choice of variations. Now, let's study this game right here. The first move by white was pawn to e4, while by black is pawn to c5. The second move by white was knight to f3. Now, black has a few variations it could play. The moves are pawn to d6, pawn to e6, pawn to g6, and knight to c6. That lead to completely different types of positions. After each move white makes, black has a very big choice of variations. For example, after black's pawn to d6, black can go for Najdorf, dragon, or Rouser systems. If black plays knight to c6, let's say white plays pawn to d4. This allows black to capture white's pawn by moving diagonally to d. The next move of white is knight to d4, like say, in order to capture black's pawn. Here comes in the variations for black. Black can either play pawn to g6 going to accelerated dragon variation, or play pawn to e5 going to Sveshnikov line. The second advantage is there's always a chance to win for the black. Sicilian defense is definitely one of the most aggressive openings for black. Even in positions where black tries to defend, it needs to look for active defense. For example, if white tries to attack black's king, most of the time the best defense is to attack white even faster. Let's look at the board here, which represents Sicilian defense dragon. White tries to use the H line for the attack, and black's counterplay here is to attack white's king. As black plays aggressive lines, it gets a chance to outplay the white. There may be some variations for white, but in most cases, when white goes for principal theoretical line, black always has a chance to make things complicated and get advantage. That is all for the advantages on Sicilian defense.
Hi, now I am going to talk about the disadvantages. The first disadvantage of Sicilian defense opening is rapid development from white. White will play quick and attempt to take advantage of black's slow development. The anti-Sicilians, which consists of various other systems played by white, is to avoid the huge amount of theory associated with the open Sicilian. Finding a black opening repertoire can be a daunting challenge. Next is kingside attack from white. This is the white strategy that can make black players crushed when they are in this line while playing. Some quick counterplay on the queen side is needed, which can give the player more chances on the white's king. And lastly, as you can see based on the diagram, is the passive looking setup from black.
Now I will be explaining about the second type of chess opening in the Sicilian defense, which is the classical variation. The classical Sicilian is an excellent opening choice for a black player who wants to play an uncompromising chess, leading to sharp as well as creative positions. Some of the advantages of playing classical variation are, it is not theoretically explored as the Sicilian Nechdorf, nor as forcing as the Sicilian Dragon. Next, it also gives an excellent winning chances due to its complexities. Lastly, it is a highly flexible, tricky and double-edged opening with which black can avoid premature simplifications and confidently go for the full point. Fun fact, the classical Sicilian was actually a huge favorite of a young Vladimir Kramnik in the mid-90s and Garry Kasparov in the 2000s.
So how to play the classical variation? Basically, the white starts by moving this pawn to e4. Then black responds by moving this pawn to c5. And after this, white moves the g1 knight to f3. And black responds by moving this pawn to d6. Then white reacts by moving this d2 pawn to d4. After that, black takes this d4 pawn and white takes it back with the knight. And after this, the black knight moves to f6. And to defend this e4 pawn, the white moves this b1 knight to c3. And after that, the b8 knight goes to c6. As you can see, the black chooses to develop the b8 knight before the f8 bishop. By doing so, the black will put lots of pressure in the center and the d4 knight. And as in the other lines, the resulting position is imbalanced and full of opportunities for both sides.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Amir bin Omar and I'm from Mechanical Engineering Department. My ID number is 18001217 and I'm going to talk about close Sicilian. Close Sicilian is a common line for white has in the Sicilian defense and it begins with the e4, c5 and the white will move nc3 for the second move. Most of the theory in the Sicilian defense revolve around the white playing nf3 on the second move, but in close Sicilian, knight c3 is a very strong move. It is very useful for players who prefer less attacking and more close position as white. In close Sicilian, white often fianchettos the light bishop and plans to slowly build up on king side. There are a few variations that you will typically see from black after you play the close Sicilian. The first variation is nc6. Here, take a look at this. The first move is e4 and then the black will move c5. And in close Sicilian, the knight will move c3 and the black response is nc6. Then the white will respond with g3, pawn to g3, so that the bishop here can move here to play along the line. Okay, and then the next variation is e5. Black play e5. Black play e5, and then the pawn here didn't need to take the pawn at e5. Instead of, we can play the g3 just like now, and the bishop here can move here and play along the line. So that's close Sicilian for you. Thank you.
Now for the third type of the Sicilian defense, which is dragon variation. The Sicilian dragon is a variant of the opening of the Sicilian defense in black. The Sicilian defense is simply the greatest answer to white's most famous opening, which is pawn to e4. The major reason is because black does a great job blocking white from playing d4 easily and creating a strong pawn center. Fianchettoing a bishop on the king side is often a safe way to keep checkmates from coming back later. By deferring your progress towards the center with the g6 move, you are providing your bishop the best diagonal he can have while also saving a pawn move later in the game. The annotation for this dragon version is: first, white moves pawn to e4 and black to c4. Next, white knight to f3 and black pawn to d6. Then, white pawn to d4 and black pawn takes on pawn on d4. Fourthly, white knight to c3 and black pawn to g6. Furthermore, white bishop to e3 and black bishop to g7. And lastly, white queen to d2 and black performs a king-side castling. There are two other versions of the dragon. Firstly, it is called accelerated dragon. The annotation for this version is white pawn to e4 and black pawn to c5. Next, the white knight to f3 and black knight to c6. Then, white pawn moves to d4 and black pawn takes on white pawn on d4. Lastly, white knight takes on the black pawn on d4 and black pawn moves to g6. So for the other variation, it is called hyper-accelerated dragon. The annotation for this version is white moves to e4 and black pawn to c5, then knight to f3 and pawn to g6.
Now I'm going to be talking about the Najdorf variation. Now the Najdorf variation follows the Sicilian opening as normal, but what makes it the Najdorf variation is that black moves its pawn to square a6. Now the Najdorf variation follows the Sicilian opening as usual, but what makes it the Najdorf variation is the pawn right here that moves from a7 to a6. Now this is a very good move because it holds the square b5 from the white pieces, knight here, this knight, and also the bishop here. And then black can also move pawn b7 to b5, where it can eventually move bishop to b7, which can put pressure to the pawn here at e4. And also, the black can also advance up to b4 so that it can put more pressure to the knight. And that what makes the move from a7 to a6 a very good move for the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian opening. And that's all from us. Thank you.